The flashing red and blue lights painted my driveway like a crime scene. 2 police cruisers idled in front of my brand new black mailbox, the same one Karen had been screaming about for days. She was standing there, arms folded, wearing her usual floral blouse and oversized sunglasses, yelling something about community regulations and aesthetics. The officers were trying their best to calm her down, but Karen was in full HOA mode, the kind where she believed she was the president of the entire world. "Ma'am, we can't do anything about this," one of the officers said, scratching his head as he looked at me. "This mailbox is installed on federal property." Karen froze. Her lips parted slightly. Her sunglasses slid down her nose, and for the first time since I'd moved into the neighborhood, she didn't have a single word to say. But let's rewind a little, because this wasn't how it started. It all began 3 weeks earlier, with a smile, a cup of lemonade, and a small act of kindness that I thought would make me part of this community. Thanks for watching. In the ride, when I first moved into Willow Creek Estates, I thought I'd found my dream neighborhood: tree-lined streets, children riding bikes, and neat lawns that looked like they were cut with scissors. The kind of place that smells like fresh-cut grass and barbecue every Saturday. I bought the little white house at the end of Maple Lane. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine: a small front porch, a garden I could work on, and a quiet pond across the street. I'd worked all my life to afford peace like this. The day I moved in, I met her, Karen. She appeared out of nowhere, like a character in a movie, clutching a clipboard and a fake smile that barely covered her disapproval. "Oh, you must be the new homeowner," she said, stretching out the word homeowner as if testing whether I really belonged here. "That's me," I said cheerfully. "Name's Daniel. I'm Karen, head of the Willow Creek HOA. She adjusted her sunglasses. "We have a few simple community rules. Lawn must be kept under 4 inches, trash bins out no earlier than 6 p.m. on pickup day, and—" "Got it," I interrupted politely. "I'll make sure to follow them." But I noticed something behind her voice, a tone that said, "I'll be watching you." At first, I brushed it off. She was just doing her job, right? "Thanks for watching," in the room, when they heard. A few days later, I decided to do something nice. My neighbor, an elderly man named Mr. Jenkins, had broken his arm and couldn't mow his lawn. So, I mowed it for him. Simple kindness. That's what I was raised on. But by the next morning, there was a note taped to my front door in bold red letters. "Unapproved landscaping on another resident's property violates HOA guidelines. Please refrain from engaging in such activities without proper authorization. Karen, HOA president." I laughed at first. Was mowing someone's lawn really a crime here? But the laughter didn't last long. Karen started showing up more often. She'd stroll by, checking mailboxes, measuring lawns, or inspecting compliance, always with that same fake smile, always watching. Then came the day my old mailbox broke. A storm had knocked it clean off the post. The door was bent, the numbers were faded, and half the neighbors' mailboxes looked like they'd been hit by the same windstorm. So, I decided to replace mine. Nothing fancy, just a sturdy black one, with a polished flag and my house number in gold letters. I didn't know it yet, but that single act would turn my peaceful new life into a full-blown HOA war. Buyer to set, and the grings to the weekend. I remember it clearly. It was a sunny Saturday morning, birds chirping, coffee in hand. I had just finished setting up the new mailbox. The post was perfectly leveled, the screws tightened, and the box looked sharp. Mr. Jenkins walked over from across the street. "That's a fine-looking mailbox, son," he said, smiling. "Wish mine looked half that good." "Thanks, Mr. Jenkins. You want me to help fix yours too?" He chuckled. "Nah, don't you worry. Karen'll probably have a say before I even get my screwdriver out." We both laughed. But our laughter didn't last long, because 15 minutes later, Karen came marching down the street, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on. That same "I smell rule violation" expression. She stopped in front of my mailbox, tilted her head, and let out a disapproving hum. "This," she said slowly, "is not the standard mailbox for Willow Creek Estates." I wiped my hands and faced her. The old one was damaged in the storm. I just replaced it with a new one. It's the same size, just different color. Karen shook her head. No, it's black. The HOA guidelines specify white or brushed silver." I blinked. "Seriously? You have color rules for mailboxes?" She smiled thinly. "We have aesthetic standards, Daniel. It's what keeps property values high." "All right," I said, trying to keep my cool. "Show me the rule book then. I'll take a look." Karen held up her clipboard. "It's all in here. Section 5. Article C. I raised an eyebrow. Funny, because my mailbox isn't even on my property. Her smile faltered. Excuse me? Yeah, I said casually. The post is across the sidewalk, right next to the curb. That's public land. Technically, it's owned by the U.S. Postal Service. For a split second, she froze. Then she regained her composure. We'll see about that. And she walked off furious. Body rate, in Tanagal, and Provis as waif, and 5 all, and 7 Dion. That night, I got an email from the HOA saying my mailbox was non-compliant and must be removed within 72 hours or I'd face fines. Fines, over a mailbox. I laughed it off. I even thought about painting it white just to avoid the drama. But something in me said no. This wasn't about color. It was about control. So instead, I called my cousin, who worked at the post office. He told me something that made me grin from ear to ear. Mailboxes installed beyond the property line on the public right-of-way are under federal jurisdiction. The HOA can't touch them. Not even Karen. I didn't plan to fight. I just wanted peace. But peace was the last thing Karen wanted. The next morning, I woke up to a loud knock on my door. It was Karen, with 2 police officers. She stood there with her arms crossed, smirking. Daniel, she said sweetly, you were warned. The mailbox needs to go. I stared past her at the flashing police lights, my heart pounding. The officers looked awkward, shifting from foot to foot. One finally said, Sir, we've had a report of non-compliance with neighborhood regulations. I pointed at the mailbox calmly. Officers, that box is on federal property. Karen's smile wavered. No, it's not. It's community property. The officer frowned, checked his notepad, and then looked at the small sign on the base of the mailbox post one that read, Property of the United States Postal Service. Karen's voice caught in her throat. That can't be. The officer looked at her and said, Ma'am, I think you're mistaken. She blinked, stunned. What do you mean? But before anyone could say another word, someone shouted from down the street. It was Mr. Jenkins, waving a folder. Officer, you might want to see this. It's about the HOA's boundaries. Karen turned pale. And that's when everything truly began to unravel. Bind dated Private Foreman teledated, and said find the well, and Foreman dated. It's now Private, and dated. Where are you watching from? Karen's face went from pale to crimson red in seconds. She looked like someone had just unplugged her from her own sense of power. Mister? Jenkins came hobbling toward us with his old folder clutched tightly in his left arm, the other one still in a sling. His voice was shaky but determined. Officers, he said, stopping a few feet away. I've got the original Willow Creek boundary map here. You might want to see it before you let her bully another homeowner. Karen spun toward him, her sunglasses glinting in the morning sun. Mr. Jenkins, she snapped, this is none of your concern. You are not on the HOA board. Jenkins gave a dry chuckle. You're right, Karen. But I've lived here longer than the HOAs even existed. I was here when this land was still under county zoning. And I remember exactly where the boundaries end right before that mailbox post. Karen's mouth opened, then shut again. The officers exchanged glances. One of them, a tall man named Officer Reed, stepped forward and took the folder from Jenkins carefully. He unfolded the old yellowed papers and squinted at the faded lines and notes. Karen's voice trembled as she said, That's outdated information. The HOA map was revised in 2015. Jenkins snorted. Oh, you mean the one you drew up yourself, without city approval? Yeah, I've seen it. The corner of my mouth twitched. I tried to keep quiet, but inside, I was boiling. Not from anger, from the months of pent-up frustration that had been building ever since I'd moved here. Every little thing had been a problem for Karen. The color of my porch light, the small garden gnome I'd placed by my walkway. Even the way I parked my truck, slightly crooked one morning. I'd stayed polite, patient. I'd ignored her ridiculous warnings and smiled through her lectures. But watching her argue with the cops over something she had no control over, that was poetic. Officer Reed folded the map again and cleared his throat. Ma'am, from what I can see here, the mailbox is indeed located beyond the HOA's property line. It falls within the public right-of-way maintained by the Postal Service. Karen's sunglasses came off completely now. You can't be serious. This entire neighborhood falls under HOA oversight. The other officer, a younger woman named Davis, crossed her arms. Even if that were true, we don't have jurisdiction over federal property disputes. Unless there's a criminal complaint, this isn't a police matter. Criminal? Karen sputtered. It's aesthetic violation. He's ruining the visual unity of the neighborhood. Reed raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, that's not a crime. The silence that followed was delicious. You could practically hear the wind whistling through the mailbox flag as it swayed gently in the breeze. But Karen wasn't done. She never was. She took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and gave me a look that could melt glass. This isn't over, Daniel, she said slowly. You may think you found a loophole, but the HOA always finds a way to protect its standards. I nodded, keeping my tone calm. Then I guess we'll find out whose standards matter more, yours or the law's. She scoffed, turned on her heel, and marched off. The officers lingered for a moment before giving me sympathetic smiles. Sir, Officer Davis said softly, you might want to be careful. Some folks don't take kindly to being proven wrong. I'll keep that in mind, I said. Thanks for your time. As their cars pulled away, I looked over at Mr. Jenkins. He was grinning. That kind of grin that said, we both know the storm's not over yet. You didn't have to step in like that, I told him. She's going to make your life miserable. Jenkins waved a hand. She already does, son. I just stopped letting her win a long time ago. He tapped his folder. You hold on to your kindness. But don't mistake kindness for weakness. That woman thrives on control. If you let her take an inch, she'll build a fence around your whole yard. That night, I sat on my porch, watching the streetlights flicker. The air was quiet, but something about it felt heavier, like the calm before a storm. Across the street, Karen's house was lit up like a Christmas tree. Through her open blinds, I could see her pacing back and forth with her phone in hand, probably calling the HOA board or anyone else who'd listen. I sipped my coffee and tried to focus on the good. I had my home, my peace, and my freedom to install whatever mailbox I wanted. That should have been enough. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't going to let it go. People like her never did. By that is no black formant, but the act genus to them, or in T2, in tum. By the next morning, the retaliation had begun. I woke up to the sound of hammering. When I stepped outside, I saw two men wearing safety vests putting up a large wooden sign at the neighborhood entrance. It read, Notice, pending OA review of mailbox compliance, residents must adhere to aesthetic uniformity standards. And beneath it, in smaller letters, all installations subject to inspection. I shook my head and laughed bitterly. This was her next move, intimidation. She couldn't touch my mailbox, so she'd try to make an example out of everyone else's. Sure enough, by noon, a few neighbors had gathered in my yard, whispering anxiously. One of them, a young mom named Trish, looked at me nervously. Karen says she might fine anyone who doesn't have the approved model. Is that true? No, I said firmly. She can't fine you over something she doesn't control. Your mailboxes are all installed past your property lines, too. She hesitated. Then why is she acting like she can? I sighed. Because fear works faster than facts. Mr. Jenkins joined us a few minutes later, holding his old cup of coffee. She's stirring folks up again. Told the book club last night that your illegal mailbox might bring down home values. Home values? I said, almost laughing. Over a mailbox? He nodded grimly. That's Karen's favorite scare tactic. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense she wasn't fighting for beauty or rules. She was fighting to keep her control intact. My little black mailbox had become a symbol of defiance, and she hated that more than anything. By evening, I decided to fight back, not with anger, but with facts. I wrote a short, polite letter to every house in the neighborhood. It explained that mailboxes outside the property line were under USPS jurisdiction, not the HOA's. I attached a link to the postal regulation document and even offered to print copies for anyone who wanted proof. I signed it simply, "From your neighbor, Daniel." Then I slipped them into every mailbox after sunset. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Some thanked me, others were confused. And Karen? She was furious. She stomped through the street yelling, "Distributing flyers without HOA approval is prohibited." But before she could reach my house, something happened that stopped her dead in her tracks. A white postal truck pulled up beside her. The mail carrier, a cheerful woman named Teresa, got out, holding a clipboard. "Morning," Teresa said brightly. "We got a complaint about a homeowner interfering with federal property. Would you happen to know anything about that?" Karen froze. Her sunglasses slid down again, and her lips trembled just slightly. Because now, it wasn't just my mailbox anymore. It was federal business. Karen's jaw twitched as the mail carrier, Teresa, stepped closer, clipboard in hand, and an official USPS badge gleaming under the morning sun. The neighbors, who had been quietly pretending to water their lawns and walk their dogs, suddenly had front row seats to the best drama Willow Creek had seen all year. Teresa stopped right in front of Karen. "We received a report that someone here has been tampering with, or attempting to regulate, postal property. That's a federal issue, ma'am." Karen blinked rapidly. "Tampering? I don't tamper. I enforce community standards." Teresa's tone stayed professional but firm. "Community standards don't apply to federal installations. Mailboxes located beyond the private property line are maintained under postal jurisdiction. Any interference, even in the form of unauthorized inspections or threats of removal, is considered a federal offense." Karen's face went redder than a fire truck. "You can't seriously be accusing me of a crime. I'm the HOA president. It's my duty to ensure uniformity." The corners of Teresa's mouth lifted into the faintest, most dangerous smile I'd ever seen. "Ma'am, uniformity doesn't override federal law." A soft chuckle rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. Even Mr. Jenkins was there, leaning on his cane with a grin spreading from ear to ear. I stood quietly, pretending to be surprised by all this, but inside, I could feel the smallest flicker of satisfaction. Still, I didn't want it to get ugly, so I stepped forward. "Teresa, it's okay. She's just passionate about her job." Karen shot me a glare that could have cracked glass. "Don't patronize me, Daniel. You caused this mess with your non-compliant box." Teresa glanced between us. "Mr. Daniel, your mailbox looks fine. It's the standard issue dimensions, correct?" "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Got the measurements right off the USPS website." "Perfect," she said, jotting something down on her clipboard. Then she turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, I'll be filing an incident report just to document this. It's standard procedure when we receive complaints of interference. You'll probably get a notice from our district office within a few days." Karen's eyes widened. "Eh? A notice?" "Just paperwork," Teresa said casually. "But it's important. You'll need to sign an acknowledgement that you understand federal property boundaries moving forward." It was like watching a lion being told to wear a leash. Karen's lips tightened into a thin line. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth, "if that's what it takes to clear this nonsense." Teresa smiled politely. "Thank you for your cooperation." As she turned and walked back to her truck, the small audience began to disperse, whispering among themselves. A few even gave me thumbs-ups or quiet nods as they went. Karen, on the other hand, stood frozen for a full 30 seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper of fury. "You think you've won, don't you?" I met her gaze evenly. "I'm not trying to win, Karen. I just want to live in peace." Her eyes narrowed. "Peace doesn't last long when people disrespect the system." Then she spun on her heel and marched away. "They way that he wants he days, to my him, and wise you love to my him, and he." For the next week, she went strangely silent. No more emails, no notes on my door, no visits. The neighborhood breathed easier. Kids played in the cul-de-sac again, dogs barked freely, and for once, you could sit on your porch without feeling like you were under surveillance. I used the time to fix up my garden, planting daffodils, repainting the porch steps, and even putting up a small wooden birdhouse beside the mailbox. I was careful not to make it too flashy. I wasn't trying to provoke her again. But every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of Karen's blinds twitching. She was watching, waiting. It felt like calm water before a wave. Then, on the 8th day, the letter arrived. A thick white envelope, marked with the HOA seal, sat in my mailbox. The same one Karen hated. I sighed, already knowing what it was. When I opened it, I nearly laughed. "Oh, a notice of violation. Subject: unauthorized decorative attachment, birdhouse. Description: homeowner has installed an unapproved structure within the HOA community boundary line. This structure disrupts neighborhood visual consistency and must be removed immediately. Non-compliance will result in fines and further action." I walked over to Mr. Jenkins's porch and showed him the letter. He laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. "A birdhouse? She's lost her marbles completely." "I think she's trying to bait me," I said. "If I react, she'll file another complaint. If I ignore it, she'll escalate." He nodded. "She can't stand not being in control. Best thing you can do is stay calm and keep proof of everything." That advice would come in handy sooner than I realized. Day one says, "And on netter, with your of there, in their noun way." 2 nights later, I was woken up by a noise outside, a faint clanging sound. Metal against metal. I grabbed a flashlight and quietly stepped onto the porch. At first, I saw nothing. Then, near the mailbox, I caught a glimpse of a figure crouching down. I shone the light and froze. Karen. She was kneeling by the mailbox, screwdriver in hand, her floral robe swaying in the wind. Her expression was pure determination. Karen, I shouted. She jumped back like she'd been electrocuted. Daniel, I was just, checking for safety compliance. By unscrewing it at midnight, I said, stepping closer. Her face went pale. You're violating HOA codes. I was inspecting You're tampering with federal property, I interrupted coldly. And this time, I have proof. I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo before she could move. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She just stood there, caught between rage and panic. You need to leave, I said firmly. Now. She took a step back, clutching her screwdriver like it was a shield. You'll regret this, Daniel. You think you're smart, but you're not the only one who knows people in high places. Then she turned and stormed back to her house, muttering under her breath. I stood there in the quiet night, the crickets chirping in the background, and for the first time, I realized this wasn't about rules anymore. This was personal. The next morning, I sent the photo and a brief report to the local postmaster, explaining what had happened. Teresa called me later that day, her voice tight with concern. You did the right thing, she said. We'll handle it from here, but don't confront her again, okay? Let us take care of it. I agreed. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something worse was coming. By evening, the neighborhood was buzzing again. Karen was pacing up and down the street, clipboard in hand, speaking to neighbors one by one. Every time someone tried to close their door, she'd wedge her foot in and keep talking. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught phrases like community safety, rogue homeowner, and setting a bad example. And then she pointed straight at my house. The crowd of curious neighbors turned. That's when I realized she wasn't just spreading rumors anymore. She was rallying them. Karen wasn't planning to fight this alone. She was building an army. By Saturday morning, the neighborhood felt different. The air was tense, the kind of tension you could almost taste. People weren't waving at me anymore when I walked outside. Some gave me tight, polite smiles. Others looked away quickly, pretending to check their mail or adjust their sprinklers. It didn't take long to find out why. There was a new flyer taped to every front door in Willow Creek Estates, printed in Karen's favorite shade of red ink. Community alert. A resident on Maple Lane has violated multiple HOA regulations, including property uniformity, safety compliance, and neighbor cooperation policies. All homeowners are encouraged to attend an emergency HOA meeting this evening at 6 p.m. at the clubhouse to discuss the matter. Attendance is mandatory. At the bottom, in all caps, our community standards define our value. President Karen W. I read it twice, feeling my stomach tighten. It was me. I didn't need to guess. There was only one resident on Maple Lane who'd made the queen of the HOA lose her crown of control. Still, I wasn't about to hide. I folded the flyer, slipped it into my pocket, and decided I'd show up to her, meeting calmly, politely, with facts on my side. Mr. Jenkins saw me from across the street and waved me over. You going tonight? He asked. Yeah, I said. Can't let her tell her story without hearing mine. He chuckled, his gray eyes full of mischief. Good, I'll come too. That woman's been scaring people long enough. And I might no cut it. At 6 sharp, the clubhouse was packed. It was a small, beige building with rows of metal chairs and that faint smell of lemon cleaner. People whispered as I walked in, and I could feel the weight of 100 eyes following me to the back row. Karen stood at the front, her floral blouse neatly pressed, her hair sprayed into perfect submission. Behind her, a projector screen displayed a PowerPoint slide titled, Maintaining Harmony in Willow Creek. Good evening, everyone, she began, her voice syrupy sweet. I called this meeting to address a very serious issue threatening our community's reputation and standards. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen clicked her remote. The next slide showed a picture of my mailbox, the black one gleaming in the sunlight, looking almost heroic. This, she said dramatically, is a clear example of non-compliance. The mailbox does not meet the approved HOA color scheme and has now inspired several homeowners to defy established guidelines. If left unchecked, this will cause disorder and reduce home values. A few neighbors nodded uncertainly. Others looked uncomfortable. I raised my hand. May I speak? Karen hesitated, her fake smile faltering. Of course, she said, through gritted teeth. I stood, my voice calm but firm. Karen, with all due respect, that mailbox isn't under your authority. The law says mailboxes placed beyond the private property line on the public right-of-way fall under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Postal Service. A few people leaned forward. I confirmed this with the local post office, I continued. In fact, a mail carrier came here personally to tell you that. The HOA can't enforce design rules on federal property. Karen gave a stiff laugh. Oh, Daniel. You've been misinformed. The HOA has special exceptions. Exceptions to federal law? I interrupted gently. She blinked, her mouth opening but no words coming out. Someone near the front whispered, "Wait, is that true?" Mr. Jenkins stood up, holding his folder like it was evidence. "I've got the original neighborhood zoning maps right here," he said. "That land was never transferred to HOA jurisdiction. It's still county managed and federal for mail." Karen's face flushed crimson. "Those maps are outdated. And besides, this isn't just about one man's mailbox. It's about the principle. The rules exist for a reason." "That's true," I said softly. "Rules exist to protect people, not control them." The room went silent. I looked around at my neighbors, real people. Not just names on an HOA list. The woman who baked cookies for the annual fair. The couple who'd just had their first baby. The teenage boy who mowed lawns to save for college. "Look," I said. "I moved here because I wanted to be part of a community. But community isn't about fear or fines or who has the shiniest porch light. It's about kindness, about helping your neighbor when they need it, about respect." For a moment, no one spoke. Then, from somewhere near the back, someone clapped. Just one person at first, then another, then a few more. Within seconds, half the room was applauding. Karen's jaw tightened. She fumbled with her remote, trying to regain control. All right, she said quickly. "Let's stay on topic. There are still serious concerns here." But before she could finish, the clubhouse door opened. Everyone turned. It was Teresa, the mail carrier still in uniform, holding a small brown envelope. "Sorry to interrupt," she said politely. "I was told this meeting involved a federal matter related to postal property." Karen's eyes widened. What? Who told you that?" Teresa smiled faintly. "A local resident sent us a report along with photographic evidence of attempted tampering." The room buzzed with murmurs. Karen looked around, visibly sweating now. "That's ridiculous. I would never." Teresa handed her the envelope. "You'll find the notice inside. It's just a reminder that unauthorized interference with mailboxes is a federal offense punishable by fines or prosecution." Karen's hands shook as she opened it. Her face went pale as she read the words. Teresa turned to me. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Daniel. I believe this resolves the matter." I nodded. "Appreciate your help." With that, she left calm, professional, unbothered. The silence in the clubhouse was deafening. Karen's authority had just crumbled in front of everyone. But then she did something unexpected. She laughed. A sharp, bitter laugh that made every hair on my neck stand up. "You all think this is funny?" she snapped, her voice cracking. "You think he's the hero here? Fine. Laugh while you can. Because when your lawns start dying and your driveways crack and your neighborhood turns into chaos, don't come crying to me." She slammed her folder shut and stormed out of the clubhouse, heels clicking, like gunshots against the tile floor. No one moved for a long moment. Then Mr. Jenkins exhaled. "Well," he said, "I think the HOA just had its first earthquake." People chuckled nervously, the tension breaking at last. Some came up to shake my hand, others patted my shoulder. But even as they smiled, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling settling in my chest. Karen might have lost this round, but something told me she wasn't done. Because when someone like Karen feels cornered, they don't quit. They retaliate. And as I walked home that night under the pale glow of the streetlights, I had no idea what kind of storm she was about to bring next. The next morning, I found a bright yellow envelope taped to my door. The kind that screamed, "Urgent," before you even opened it. In big, bold letters at the top it read, "HOA notice of violation." My stomach dropped, not because I was scared, but because I already knew who was behind it, Karen. She must have been up early again, stalking the neighborhood with her clipboard and camera, hunting for anything she could label a violation. It was becoming her favorite sport. I peeled the letter off my door and tore it open. Inside, it claimed that my newly installed mailbox violated HOA regulations for aesthetic uniformity, and that I had 48 hours to remove it or face a fine of $500 per day. $500. I couldn't help but laugh. The audacity was unreal. The HOA rules were strict, yes, but the key detail Karen didn't know yet was that my mailbox wasn't even on HOA property. See, a few months ago, I'd learned that the patch of land by the curb wasn't actually owned by the HOA. It was federal land under the jurisdiction of the United States Postal Service. A public easement, to be exact. Which meant any mailbox installed there followed federal regulations, not Karen's fancy HOA handbook. But I didn't plan to reveal that just yet. I wanted to see how far Karen was willing to go with her crusade. That afternoon, I went outside to check my mailbox. It looked perfect, clean, sturdy, with a flag that worked smoothly and a lock that actually kept mail safe. My old one had been falling apart, and the HOA never lifted a finger to fix it despite my repeated requests. So, I'd taken it upon myself to replace it with full USPS compliance. But to Karen, this was personal. Across the street, she was already watching. Her arms were crossed, her lips pursed tight, and that little chihuahua of hers, Snickers, was barking furiously from her porch. She called out, "You can't just put up anything you like, you know. It ruins the neighborhood's look." I stayed calm. "Karen, the old one was broken. I replaced it with a legal one. No problem here. Convict." She strutted over, waving a copy of the HOA handbook. "It clearly says all mailboxes must be identical. You can't just—" "Actually," I interrupted, keeping my voice even. "The HOA doesn't have authority over federal property. This mailbox sits on a USPS easement." "Oh, don't give me that nonsense," she snapped, her cheeks flushing. "Everything in this neighborhood falls under HOA rules." I didn't argue. Instead, I smiled and said, "All right, Karen. You do what you think you have to do." Then I turned around and walked back inside, leaving her fuming on the sidewalk. That night, I heard her on the phone outside. Her voice carried through the still air. She was talking to someone on the HOA board, ranting about how my mailbox was illegal and how I was setting a bad example. I sat by the window sipping tea, trying to keep my cool. I didn't want a war. I really didn't. But when someone tries to bully you over something you know you're right about, sometimes standing firm is the only option. The next day, I got another letter, this time slipped under my door. It was signed by the HOA president, Mr. Duncan. He was a quiet man, usually fair-minded. But you could tell he was under Karen's thumb. The letter repeated the threat of fines, and even warned about potential legal action. I decided it was time to respond, but not with anger, with facts. I drafted a formal letter citing USPS Code 39 CFR 111, explaining that all residential mailboxes fall under federal regulation, and that HOAs have no authority to override USPS standards. I attached a copy of the easement map that clearly marked the strip by the road as Postal Service property. When I handed the letter to the HOA office, the receptionist, a sweet older lady named Marie, gave me a sympathetic smile. "You're the third person she's gone after this month," she whispered. "Don't worry, she'll calm down eventually." I hoped so. But Karen didn't calm down. Later that evening, as I was mowing the lawn, she came marching up again, this time with her phone camera recording. "I'm documenting this for the HOA board," she announced loudly. "You've been warned twice. You're in violation." I turned off the mower, wiped the sweat off my forehead, and faced her. "Karen, if you want to record something, you should record the fact that this mailbox isn't even yours to control." "Oh, really?" she sneered. "Then we'll let the police decide, won't we?" I almost laughed at the absurdity. But I stopped myself, because I could tell she wasn't bluffing this time. That night, I noticed something strange. A few cars drove slowly past my house. Headlights dimmed. I could see silhouettes inside, probably HOA board members or Karen's little committee trying to get photos or proof of violations. It was both creepy and ridiculous. I went out with my flashlight and shined it straight at one of the cars. The driver sped off. By morning, a new notice was taped to my mailbox. This time, it was from the HOA, and signed by Karen personally, warning me of a final escalation. I knew what was coming next. Still, I went about my day normally. I watered my plants, waved to my kind neighbor Mr. Allen, who just shook his head and muttered, "That woman's got too much time on her hands." Then, around 3 p.m., as I was heading inside, I heard sirens. 2 police cars rolled slowly into the neighborhood, their lights flashing softly. The neighbors came out, curious. Karen was right behind them, waving her arms dramatically like she was leading a parade. "There, that's him," she shouted. "That's the one with the illegal mailbox." The officers parked and stepped out, both looking confused. One of them asked, "Ma'am, what exactly is the emergency?" Karen crossed her arms. "He's violating HOA regulations and refused to remove his non-compliant mailbox. This is a community safety issue." One of the officers turned to me and blinked. "You called us about a mailbox?" The crowd started to chuckle. Karen's face turned red, but she stood her ground. "It's not funny. It's against the rules." The officer looked at me. "Sir, can you show us the mailbox in question?" I nodded, hiding a grin. "Sure thing, officers. But before we begin, you might want to know this is actually federal property." Their eyes met. One of them raised an eyebrow, clearly realizing this was about to take a very interesting turn. And that's when Karen's confident smile finally began to fade. The moment I said the words, "federal property," the entire street went dead silent. Even the birds seemed to pause mid-song. Karen blinked, like she hadn't heard me right, then crossed her arms tighter, her chin lifting defiantly. "Federal property?" she repeated, laughing a little too loud. "Oh, please, you think you're smarter than the HOA, huh? That mailbox sits right there on community land. We all pay dues for its upkeep." The officer closest to me, a tall man with salt and pepper hair named Officer Bryant, glanced from her to me, clearly trying to keep a neutral face. "All right," he said calmly. "Why don't you explain what's going on here from the beginning?" I nodded and walked them both over to the curb, pointing at the small metal post that the mailbox was mounted on. "See this spot here?" I said. "There's an easement. The USPS owns this stretch of land. It's public property maintained by the Postal Service. That means it's outside HOA jurisdiction." Karen huffed behind me. "He's making that up. There's no such thing." But I was ready. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded document, the easement map I'd printed from the county's website. I handed it to Officer Bryant, who unfolded it and started reading. "This area," I said, tracing the map with my finger, "is labeled as Postal Service easement. The HOA owns up to here." I drew a line just a few feet behind the mailbox, but not this part. "So technically, my mailbox sits on federal property." Officer Bryant's partner, a younger officer named Ramirez, frowned. "Wait, so, if it's federal?" "Exactly," I said. "The Postal Service regulates mailbox design and placement, not Karen." Karen let out a loud scoff. "That's ridiculous. Everyone else in the neighborhood has the same style. You can't just do whatever you want. This is a community." The older officer looked at her, trying hard not to roll his eyes. "Ma'am," he said politely, "unless this mailbox is posing some kind of safety risk or was installed illegally, this isn't a police matter." Karen's mouth fell open. But he's breaking the rules. The HOA handbook says." Officer Ramirez gently interrupted. "The HOA handbook isn't federal law, ma'am." That one sentence hit her like a slap. Her face flushed crimson. The crowd of neighbors who had gathered to watch began whispering among themselves. Some were clearly amused, others uncomfortable. But Karen wasn't done. She stepped closer, her voice trembling with anger. "You can't just let him get away with this. What's next? Rainbow fences? Neon lights? We'll all lose property value." The officers exchanged a look, then turned back toward their patrol cars. "Ma'am, this sounds like a civil disagreement, not a criminal one," Officer Bryant said. "We're going to log the call, but there's nothing more we can do here." They started walking back toward their cars, but Karen followed them, waving her arms like a windmill. "You're making a mistake. He's lying. You can't just ignore a community complaint." They didn't stop. When the police cars finally rolled away, Karen stood frozen on the curb, breathing hard, her jaw set tight. I could see the fury boiling inside her like she couldn't believe her authority had just been publicly dismissed. I walked over to her, calm and collected. "Karen," I said softly, "you could have just asked me before all this. I'd have explained it to you. You didn't need to call the cops." She spun around to face me, eyes blazing. "Don't you dare act innocent. You embarrassed me in front of everyone." "I didn't embarrass you," I said. "You did that yourself." For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared at me like she wanted to tear the mailbox out of the ground with her bare hands. Then she muttered, "You'll regret this," and stormed off toward her house, Snickers barking at her heels. The neighbors began dispersing, murmuring things like, "Finally, someone stood up to her," and "She's out of control." Mr. Allen, my older neighbor from 2 doors down, patted my shoulder as he passed. "You handled that well, son," he said. "But watch out. Karen doesn't lose gracefully." I knew he was right. That night, I sat on my porch, the sound of crickets filling the air. I kept thinking about what Karen had said. "You'll regret this." She wasn't the type to let things go. But even as I thought about it, I felt something else: pride. I'd stood up for myself, calmly and legally. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't stooped to her level. I'd used facts and patience, and in front of everyone, it had worked. Still, I couldn't shake a bad feeling. People like Karen didn't back down. They regrouped. Sure enough, the next morning, I saw her outside again. She was standing near her mailbox, phone in hand, talking to someone in an urgent, hushed voice. She kept looking toward my house as she spoke. Then, later that afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. Subject: HOA Emergency Board Meeting Agenda, Property Violations. The message was brief but clear. Attendance is mandatory for all homeowners. My stomach tightened. She was escalating again. At 6 p.m. sharp, I walked into the community hall. About 30 neighbors were already seated, whispering. Karen sat at the front beside Mr. Duncan, looking smug and self-satisfied. She had a neat little folder of papers in front of her. When Mr. Duncan called the meeting to order, she wasted no time. "I'd like to address the ongoing situation involving Lot 24. She began. "My house. This homeowner has repeatedly defied HOA guidelines by installing a non-conforming mailbox. Despite multiple warnings, he continues to violate our standards and create division in our community." I raised my hand calmly. "Mr. Duncan, if I may." Karen cut me off. "You'll get your turn." The room murmured. Mr. Duncan looked tired already. "Please, Karen, let's keep this civil." She smiled sweetly. "Of course." I waited until she was done with her exaggerated speech, then stood. "With all due respect," I said, "my mailbox is on federal land. The HOA has no legal authority over it. I've provided documentation to prove this." I walked to the front and placed copies of the easement map on the table. Karen laughed. "You printed something from the internet. That's not official proof." Mr. Duncan picked up the document, studying it carefully. "This looks legitimate, Karen," he said slowly. Her smile faltered. "You can't be serious." He sighed. "Karen, we'll verify it with the county records office. But if this checks out, there's nothing the HOA can enforce here." The room buzzed with whispers. Karen turned red again, her composure cracking. "This is unbelievable. You're all letting him ruin our standards." I didn't gloat. I just said, "Sometimes doing what's right doesn't mean doing what's popular, Karen." She slammed her folder shut and stormed out of the room. Everyone was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, a few people started clapping. Mr. Duncan looked at me and smiled faintly. "You handled that better than I would have." I nodded. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't defeated. She was just plotting her next move. And as the meeting ended and I walked out into the cool night air, I could feel it somewhere behind those perfectly trimmed hedges and smiling neighbors. A storm was brewing. I knew the silence after that HOA meeting was too good to be true. For 3 days, everything in the neighborhood seemed peaceful. Karen wasn't patrolling the streets. No new letters appeared on my door, and no one mentioned my mailbox. It almost felt like life was normal again. Almost. But if there's one thing I'd learned, it's that Karen never retreats, she reloads. On the 4th morning, I woke up to the sound of metal scraping. At first, I thought it was just the garbage truck. But when I looked out my window, I froze. Karen was standing by my mailbox with a wrench in one hand and her phone in the other, recording herself as she tried to unscrew the base of my mailbox post. I ran outside barefoot. "Karen, what are you doing?" She didn't even flinch. "This mailbox is in violation of HOA rules, and as an acting member of the HOA Compliance Committee, I have the right to remove it." I couldn't believe what I was seeing. "You do realize you're tampering with federal property, right?" I said, my voice rising. "That's a federal offense." She scoffed. "Oh, don't be dramatic. It's community property. I have full authority." Then she actually yanked on the mailbox, trying to pull it loose. I took out my phone and started recording. "Karen, I'm warning you. You're about to commit a federal crime on camera." Her expression flickered just for a second, but then she straightened up, lips tight. "You're bluffing." Before I could say another word, she managed to loosen one of the bolts. The entire mailbox wobbled dangerously. That's when I saw my chance. "All right," I said calmly. I think the postal inspector's office will find this interesting. I'll send them the footage myself. Her wrench froze midair. The what? The U.S. Postal Inspection Service, I said. They handle all crimes involving mail, delivery equipment, and postal property. They're federal law enforcement. Her face drained of color. You're lying. Want me to call them right now? I asked, holding up my phone. She hesitated. Her hand trembled slightly, still gripping the wrench. You wouldn't. Try me, I said. She let go of the wrench and took a step back, breathing hard. Snickers barked from her porch, like he was scolding her for losing her nerve. Karen turned to the camera on her phone and mumbled something about documenting evidence, then stormed off, muttering under her breath. I stood there, heart pounding, watching her retreat. Part of me wanted to laugh. The other part was just tired. I retightened the loose bolt and checked the base for damage. Thankfully, she hadn't gotten far enough to break anything. But the thought of her out there, scheming again, made me uneasy. That evening, I sat on the porch with Mr. Allen. He shook his head slowly as I told him what happened. She's going too far, he said. You might need to call the postal authorities for real, just in case. I might, I said. But I want to give her one last chance to stop. He gave me a look. People like her don't stop until someone makes them. He was right again. 2 days later, I came home from work to find something new taped to my door, a certified letter from the HOA. My stomach sank before I even opened it. Inside, it said that I was being fined $3,000 for defacing community property and threatening an HOA officer. I laughed bitterly. So this was her next move, retaliation through paperwork. The letter demanded payment within 7 days or I'd face legal escalation. I could almost picture Karen grinning as she typed it up, convinced she'd found a loophole to get back at me. But I wasn't about to let her win. I went inside, pulled out my laptop, and started drafting a response. In the email, I attached a copy of the easement map proving the mailbox was on federal land, a time-stamped video of Karen trying to dismantle it, a link to the USPS official regulations about mailboxes, a line stating that any further interference would result in a report to the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, and potential legal action for tampering with federal property. I copied the HOA board, the property management company, and just for good measure the local postmaster. I hit send. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. It was Mr. Duncan. Hey, he said, sounding nervous. I just saw your email. I didn't know Karen went that far. She did, I said flatly. And I have proof. He sighed. Look, I'll handle it. You won't be fined. Just try to stay calm, okay? I'll talk to her. Good luck, I said. You'll need it. The next morning, Karen's car was gone. For the first time in weeks, her driveway was empty. The whole neighborhood felt quieter, lighter somehow. Later that day, Mr. Duncan stopped by. She's been asked to step down from the HOA board, he said quietly. Too many complaints. Too much drama. I blinked. Seriously? He nodded. She didn't take it well. She stormed out of the meeting. Said she'd get the last word. But for now, she's off the board. I felt a wave of relief, mixed with unease. What does that mean? I asked. He shrugged. Knowing her, probably nothing good. That night, I found out what he meant. Around 11 p.m., I heard a noise outside, a faint clinking sound. I peeked through the blinds and saw the beam of a flashlight near my driveway. My heart started racing. I grabbed my phone and zoomed in. It was Karen. She was back. She wasn't touching the mailbox this time. She was pouring something on the ground around it, some kind of liquid. I couldn't tell what it was, but it smelled strong, even from my window. Gasoline? Paint thinner? I didn't wait to find out. I stepped outside and called out, Karen, what are you doing? She froze like a deer in headlights, then bolted for her car. I managed to snap a picture of her license plate before she sped off into the night. My hands were shaking. This wasn't just an HOA feud anymore, it was getting dangerous. The next morning, I called the police and filed a report. The officer took my statement seriously when I mentioned the smell of gasoline. He said they'd patrol the neighborhood for the next few nights. That day, several neighbors came by, offering support. Even people who had once sided with Karen were now apologizing. We didn't realize she'd gone off the deep end, one woman said quietly. And as much as I appreciated it, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over yet. Because Karen wasn't the type to disappear quietly. No, she was the kind to strike back when no one was watching. And deep down, I had a feeling she was planning something much, much worse. It happened 2 nights later. I'll never forget it, the smell, the light, the way the shadows danced across the street like the world had caught fire. Because, in a way, it had. It was just past midnight when I woke up to the sound of something popping outside. At first, I thought it was thunder. But then came the faint crackle of flames. My heart jumped. I rushed to the window, and my worst fear became real. My mailbox was on fire. The flames licked up the post like hungry fingers, glowing orange against the dark night. Sparks drifted toward the dry grass by the sidewalk. If it spread to the lawn, it could have reached the house. I ran out barefoot, adrenaline flooding through me. The heat hit my face as I grabbed the garden hose and sprayed water directly onto the flames. Steam hissed up, filling the air with a sharp, metallic smell. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the hose. Come on, I muttered, spraying again and again until the last ember sizzled out. The post was blackened, the paint blistered, but the structure still stood, barely. Within minutes, flashing red lights painted the neighborhood. 2 fire trucks, a police cruiser, and half the block standing in their pajamas, murmuring. "Mr." Alan came running over, his robe half open, eyes wide. "What happened?" I pointed to the charred mailbox. "Someone set it on fire?" The fire chief crouched to inspect it, his flashlight sweeping over the melted flag and burned grass. "Looks like an accelerant," he said. "Gasoline or lighter fluid." "Maybe both." The officer on scene, a woman named Daniels, turned to me. "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" I didn't hesitate. "Yeah, Karen." The crowd gasped. Even at midnight, that name sent a wave of whispers through the street. Karen's house, however, was dark. No porch light, no movement. Officer Daniels jotted something in her notebook. "You said she's been harassing you before, right? About the mailbox?" "Yes," I said. "I even have footage of her trying to take it apart last week. I filed a report when she came back at night pouring something near it. You should still have that on record." She nodded. "We'll pull it up." Mr. Allen stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think she really did this, son?" "Eh?" I glanced at the blackened remains. "She's the only one angry enough to try." Officer Daniels and another officer went over to Karen's house to knock on her door. They stood there for a while, knocking, calling her name. No response. Eventually one of them peered through the blinds, then shook his head. No movement inside. Car's gone too. "Maybe she left town," I said. Officer Daniels frowned. "Or she's hiding out." The investigation went on for nearly an hour. They took pictures, samples from the scorched ground, and my statement again. When they finally left, the mailbox stood there, like a ghost of what it used to be. The next morning, I didn't get much sleep. Word spread fast. Neighbors stopped by, offering sympathy and coffee. Some even started whispering theories how Karen had gone off the rails, how she'd been ranting about me in the HOA Facebook group before the fire. By noon, an official message from the HOA appeared in everyone's inbox. Subject: Community Safety. Notice: we are aware of a suspected act of vandalism that occurred last night. The board condemns all forms of harassment or property damage. Please report any suspicious activity to the police. No mention of names, but everyone knew. Still, what struck me most was the silence from Karen. No calls, no emails, no angry letters. It was like she'd vanished. But that calm didn't feel peaceful, it felt wrong. That evening, I was outside cleaning soot off the sidewalk when a car pulled up slowly in front of my house. A white SUV. I tensed up immediately. It was Karen's. She rolled down the window. Her hair was messy, her eyes sunken like she hadn't slept in days. "You happy now?" she said, her voice trembling. "You made me lose everything." I froze. "Karen? What are you talking about?" She gripped the steering wheel tighter. "The HOA forced me out. The police have been calling. People in this neighborhood look at me like I'm a criminal." I stepped closer but kept my distance. "Karen, if you had nothing to do with the fire, you should cooperate. Tell the truth." Her eyes flashed with something sharp: anger, guilt, maybe both. "You think you're so clever. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. You destroyed my reputation." "Karen," I said carefully, "you did that yourself." For a second, I thought she was going to lunge out of the car. Instead, she slammed the gas and sped off, tires screeching. I just stood there, heart pounding. That night, I couldn't shake the unease. I double-checked the locks, left the porch light on, and even set up a small motion camera by the mailbox remains. I didn't trust her not to come back. At around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. The motion camera had triggered. I opened the live feed and froze. Karen was back. She wasn't alone this time. Another figure stood beside her, a man I didn't recognize. They were whispering, pointing at the mailbox. The man carried a crowbar. I called 911 immediately, whispering to the dispatcher. They're back. The same woman who vandalized my property before. She has someone with her. Stay inside, sir, the dispatcher said. Officers are on their way. I watched from the window as they crouched down near the post, trying to pry something up. I realized with horror what they were doing. They weren't just trying to break the mailbox this time. They were trying to dig it out of the ground. Within minutes, police lights flooded the street. Karen's head jerked up. She screamed something to the man, and they both bolted toward the SUV. But this time, they didn't make it. 2 police cruisers boxed them in before they could drive off. Officers jumped out, shouting commands. The man dropped the crowbar instantly. Karen, however, just stood there, frozen, her mouth open like she couldn't believe it was happening. I watched as they handcuffed her. She didn't even fight. She just kept shaking her head, whispering, "This isn't fair. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood." The officers collected the crowbar and the tools as evidence, then came to my door. "Sir," one said, "we've detained both individuals. We'll need you to provide a full statement again." I nodded, still staring at the flashing lights outside. Karen's car door slammed, and she was driven away. And for the first time since this all started, I felt something like relief. Not joy, never joy. Just the deep, shaky exhale that comes when the storm finally breaks. But even as I closed the door, I couldn't help wondering what she'd meant by, "You'll regret this." Because with Karen, I'd learned one thing. Even when she lost, she always left something behind. Something unfinished. Something waiting. The morning after Karen's arrest felt strange, too quiet, too still. The neighborhood usually hummed with the sound of sprinklers, barking dogs, and early joggers, but that day it was as if the entire street was holding its breath. Even the birds seemed to have decided it wasn't safe to sing. I stood at my front window, watching the sun climb over the rooftops, still half expecting to see Karen's white SUV parked across the street. But it wasn't there. The police had impounded it after the arrest, and rumor had it she'd spent the night in county jail awaiting charges for attempted vandalism and trespassing. Yet despite her absence, I couldn't relax. Every creak of the house made my skin crawl. Every car door slamming in the distance made me glance up. I'd spent weeks dealing with Karen's harassment, her complaints, her shouting, the letters, the petty acts of revenge, and I'd thought it would all end once she was caught. But it didn't feel over. Not even close. At around 9 a.m., there was a knock at the door. My heart jumped before I saw it was Officer Daniels again. The same woman who'd handled the fire report. She stood there holding a small plastic evidence bag. Inside it, folded neatly, was an envelope with my name written on it in thick black marker. "Good morning," she said. "We found this in the front seat of Miss Harper's vehicle." "Karen left me a letter?" I asked, confused. Daniels nodded. "We thought it best to deliver it directly. The district attorney will hold it as evidence, but you're free to read a copy." She handed me a printed duplicate and added quietly, "It's a little unsettling." I thanked her, closed the door, and sat down at the kitchen table. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried more than words. I unfolded it carefully. The smell of gasoline faint on the page. "Dear Name, you think you've won. You think the police will make this go away. But they don't understand what's really happening here. That reservoir you've been managing, it's not what you think it is. I told the board. I told the county, but nobody listens. You're draining something that doesn't belong to you or to anyone. You're going to regret this, not because of me, because of what you've disturbed. Karen." I stared at it for a long time. "Because of what you've disturbed." What the hell was that supposed to mean? I wanted to dismiss it as more of Karen's paranoia, another attempt to intimidate me, but something about the wording sent a chill down my spine. The way she wrote "doesn't belong to anyone" sounded religious, almost superstitious, like she truly believed in something deeper, something beyond HOA rules and property lines. I pushed the letter aside and went outside for air. The morning breeze smelled faintly of wet soil and smoke. The blackened mailbox stood as a reminder of everything that had happened, its charred edges curling like paper. Across the street, Neighbors were gathered in little clusters, whispering. I caught snippets. She lost it completely. They found something in her trunk. She was talking about the water again. I walked over to Mr. Allen, who seemed to know everything before anyone else. What's this about the water? I asked. He looked around before lowering his voice. One of the officers said Karen kept ranting in the holding cell about the pond that it wasn't safe to drain. Said something about the original boundary line being cursed. I frowned. Cursed? Yeah, he said with a nervous laugh. Sounds crazy, right? But you know Karen. She believed that pond was sacred or historical or something. I shook my head. There's nothing sacred about a drainage reservoir. Maybe not to you, he said, but apparently she thought it was built over some kind of old waterway like an old well system that predates the development. She said when you started pumping it out, you were releasing what should have stayed sealed. I exhaled, trying not to roll my eyes, but a small part of me couldn't ignore how unnerving it all sounded, especially after the way Karen had written her letter. That evening, I went down to the reservoir again. It sat just beyond the line of oaks behind my property. A shallow stretch of muddy water with cattails and frogs. I had started draining it a week before all this chaos because of an inspection order. The county had marked it as an overflow reservoir, meaning I was legally required to maintain it. The HOA had assumed it was decorative, but technically, it fell under my property deed after the last boundary adjustment. When I reached the water's edge, I noticed something strange. The mud near the pump was darker than usual, slick and bubbling faintly, even though the air was cool. The water line had receded further than I expected, revealing the outline of something flat, circular, metallic, partially buried in the silt. I crouched closer. It looked like a hatch. A rusted iron hatch with a broken handle, almost camouflaged in the mud. For a second I thought maybe it was just old drainage equipment, some remnant from when the reservoir was built decades ago. But then I noticed the engraving's faint symbols along the rim, worn down by time. Not letters, not numbers. Symbols. I reached out, brushing mud off with my sleeve, and instantly felt a pulse of cold air escape from beneath it. It wasn't just cold, it moved. Like something exhaling. I stumbled back, my heart hammering. The air that came out smelled old, earthy, and metallic like a cellar that had been sealed for a century. Suddenly, the frogs stopped croaking. Every sound around me, crickets, wind, the distant hum of traffic, faded into silence. Then came a faint splash from the middle of the reservoir. I shined my flashlight toward the water. Nothing, just ripples spreading slowly outward. I don't know how long I stood there staring, unable to move. Eventually, I forced myself to turn off the pump and head back to the house, every instinct in me screaming to get away from that place. When I got inside, I poured a drink, trying to steady my nerves. I told myself it was nothing, an air pocket, methane, something natural, but the image of that rusted hatch wouldn't leave my mind. Later that night, as I sat in bed reading Karen's letter again, I heard it. A low, hollow sound echoing from outside, almost like metal shifting or something pushing against it. Then came a drip, slow, deliberate. Drip, drip, drip. I went to the window, and that's when I saw it water creeping up from the storm drain near the curb, dark and thick, even though it hadn't rained in days. I grabbed my phone and started recording, whispering to myself, this can't be happening. Because somehow, the water was rising again. Not from rain, from below. And in that moment, I finally understood what Karen meant when she said I'd disturbed something that didn't belong to anyone. Something that had been waiting under that reservoir for a long, long time. I didn't sleep that night. Every few minutes, I'd glance out my bedroom window, watching the streetlights shimmer off the puddles, gathering near the curb. The water wasn't spreading fast, but it wasn't stopping either. It moved with a quiet, eerie persistence, like something creeping closer by choice rather than chance. By 3 a.m., my nerves couldn't take it anymore. I threw on my boots, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped outside. The air was thick and cold, the kind that clung to your skin and made every breath feel damp. My neighbors' houses were dark, silent. Even the crickets had gone quiet. As I walked toward the reservoir, my beam caught the edge of my mailbox, charred, bent, and now half submerged in murky water that hadn't been there the day before. The ground beneath my feet squelched. I could smell mud and something metallic, like old pennies and rust. When I reached the edge of the reservoir, the water line had risen almost 2 feet since I last checked. The hatch I'd uncovered the night before was gone, swallowed beneath the surface. The entire pond rippled as if something was shifting underneath it. My flashlight flickered. the beam struggling to cut through the mist that now hung low over the water. That's when I heard it faint, muffled, a tapping sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was rhythmic, metallic, coming from somewhere deep beneath the surface. I crouched down, my heartbeat sinking with the sound. "Hello?" I whispered before I could stop myself. And then the air went completely still. The frogs weren't croaking. The wind had died. Even the usual hum of the distant highway had faded away. I felt utterly alone, as though the entire world was holding its breath with me. Then came the vibration, a deep, rumbling tremor that traveled through the ground and into my bones. The water began to churn violently, spinning into a whirlpool that sucked at the mud and cattails. My flashlight slipped from my hand and vanished into the chaos. I stumbled backward, nearly losing my footing, and that's when something broke the surface. A burst of air shot upward, spraying me with cold droplets that stung my skin. The smell was unbearable. Rotting earth and rusted iron. Out of pure instinct, I ran back toward my house, slipping twice on the slick grass before reaching my porch. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my chest heaving, heart pounding like a drum. From inside, I could still hear it. That hollow, echoing sound of metal groaning and water slapping against the banks. Then, silence again. I backed away from the door, half expecting it to burst open at any moment, but nothing happened. After what felt like hours, I collapsed into a chair, trying to calm down. "It's just pressure," I whispered to myself. Old pipes, underground pressure. But no part of me believed it. By sunrise, the water had receded back to its normal level, as if nothing had happened. The hatch was visible again, caked in mud but now tilted slightly open. My mailbox leaned sideways, barely hanging on. I stood there staring at it, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen was just exhaustion or stress. That's when I heard the knock. It wasn't the front door this time, it was my back porch. I turned slowly. Through the glass, I saw Officer Daniels standing there again. Her uniform neat, her expression unreadable. I let her in, still shaken. "I came by to check on you," she said. "We've had reports of strange activity near the reservoir." I hesitated. "You heard about last night?" She nodded. "A few people said they saw the water moving, but no one could explain it. We sent a crew early this morning to check it out. They found something." My pulse quickened. "What did they find?" Daniels reached into her pocket and pulled out a small metal plate, the size of a postcard. It was caked in dried mud, etched with the same strange symbols I'd seen on the hatch. "This was lodged in one of the drainage filters," she said. "Engineering," I said. "It doesn't match anything they've ever seen. Definitely not modern construction. Looks older. Maybe early 1900s. Does that mean there's an older structure under there?" I asked. She shrugged. "Possibly. Could have been a sealed well or a storm containment vault. But it's not listed on any municipal records." "Karen mentioned it," I said quietly. "She said I was disturbing something." Daniels raised an eyebrow. "You think she knew about this?" "I think she believed she did," I replied. "She called it cursed." The officer sighed. "Let's not jump to that. Still, we're sending an environmental team tomorrow to investigate. Until then, I'd suggest keeping your distance from that reservoir." After she left, I sat alone on my porch, staring at the water. For the first time since this whole ordeal started, I didn't feel angry or scared of Karen. I felt sorry for her. Whatever she'd been trying to warn me about, she must have truly believed it. Maybe she wasn't just being spiteful or controlling. Maybe, in her own way, she thought she was protecting everyone. That evening, the sun dipped behind the trees, painting the sky in deep orange. The calm was deceptive. I could hear frogs again, and it almost felt peaceful. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the calm was temporary. I decided to record one last video for documentation. I set up my phone on the porch railing, camera pointed at the reservoir, and began narrating everything that had happened. The letter, the hatch, the water, the strange noises. As I talked, I zoomed in toward the muddy shoreline. That's when I noticed movement. Someone was standing at the far edge of the water, a figure in a dark jacket, hair blowing in the wind. For a split second, I thought it was a trick of light. But then the figure took a step closer, and I saw her face. Karen. Or someone who looked exactly like her. Her hair was soaked, her eyes were hollow. She just stood there, staring at me across the water. unmoving. I froze, unable to speak. The camera kept recording, the red light blinking steadily. Then, without a sound, she turned and walked straight into the reservoir. Not toward it, into it. The water rippled, swallowed her whole, and went still again. I ran down to the edge, shining my flashlight frantically, shouting her name, but there was nothing. No footprints, no bubbles, no trace. Just silence. And then, faintly, the sound returned. Tap, tap, tap. This time, closer. Somewhere deep beneath my feet. I dropped my flashlight and backed away slowly, my mind spinning, my throat tight. Was it real? Was I losing it? All I knew was that the water was calm again, the moon reflecting off it perfectly still. But in the silence, I could feel it watching me. Something was still down there. And maybe, it always had been. Where are you watching from?